We're all slaves of the almighty dollar, I guess.
Unfortunately.
So,
No matter how much money there is in the kitty.
well, I don't know how much.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board, November 6, 2018. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did Peter create any minutes for us? I don't recall seeing any. Moving on. I just heard from Sheila she got a call to Hither Creek about a boat capsizing. She's going to try to get here, but she did have a couple tidbits of information that the Robert B. Auer Company has been awarded a contract to begin some dredging at Pulpus Harbor, possibly next week or the week after. It'll be done by a crane on a barge that moves the sand to Steamship Wharf and then trucks it to a site from there for storage. She'd also like to speak on the Helix mooring. Would hope that we wouldn't move forward, so we'll have some discussion whether she's here or not, but we'll see how we move from there. Natural Resources, Jeff.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick update for everybody, and then a couple things. We're in the process of rehiring our water quality specialist. For those who don't know, Caitlin Shaw left the employment of the town kind of at the end of the season, kind of finish out the field season. We finished our first round of interviews and have two that are coming back that we'll be doing in the next 2 weeks. We'll have those in person here, but I think we have two pretty decent candidates that we're looking at to hopefully fill that position and hopefully get here and off and rolling here pretty shortly, get kind of acclimated to the program and to what's happening over the winter, and then have hopefully a fairly seamless transition next year for that position that Caitlin was doing for us. So we're excited about that. As for the hatchery itself, they've kind of shut down operations for the year and are madly fixing and repairing and cleaning and doing all the things that they do to kind of end the cycle for the hatchery season. And then we are slated up to start production again on algae production here on like January the 1st or right after the 1st of the year. Moving into next field season, the next hatchery season. Coming forward, I'm trying to think what else is happening department wise that we're working on. Other than that, I mean, we're kind of in some project design and some working on some grant applications that are due in a few months for some more coastal resiliency style projects that we're looking at. Other thing that's come up, obviously, scallop season has started, commercial season has started. Getting a lot of feedback that the season is off to a bit of a tough start. I think if we want to talk about that later, we certainly can. Under new business, just briefly, but we can touch on more of it then. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot to add. It's kind of a short one.
Any results on water quality?
So we're waiting to get those back. Our first set of raw data is in from the early season. They're hoping to have the next set to us here kind of before Thanksgiving. And then they're hoping to have the full technical memo to us kind of by the end of the year. With that being said, I guess other projects that are involved in that, we also are looking at doing a model rerun out in Nantucket for some of the scenarios that we've talked about and vetted a scope through. Nantucket homeowners, Nantucket residents, and Nantucket Conservation Association. The Land Council participated too. We kind of looked at a scope at redoing the model that gave us the TMDL out there, and we're hoping to have that back from them by the end of the year as well, when their contract is supposed to have that to us. So that may guide us a little bit further into what options or what management recommendations we're looking at as far as more pods that are creek and Nantucket Harbor. Some of those scenarios include some work at the landfill, obviously, just some regular land use and water quality data updates in the model itself. Looking at some dredging for like Nantucket Ditch, looking at the creek, some shellfish options as part of that as well. So it's a little bit of a re-look at that model to kind of reassess based upon the data we've been collecting about what options we may have to help with water quality out in Nantucket. So we'll have all of that hopefully by end of December, start of January. Holidays are always tricky with this, so hopefully very soon. As soon as we have those, we'll get those up on the website, email those around so people can start looking at those.
Were there any noticeable algae blooms over the summer?
We had more. Just looking at Nantucket Harbor, we did have a bloom, a regular rust tide bloom again. It didn't seem as significant in some spots and was pretty dense in some other spots. It didn't seem as significant as prior years in some spots. Our bigger algae problem this year, we had a number of blooms in both Hummock and Myaconda pond. Myaconda actually started much earlier this year, bloom-wise, so something we're keeping an eye on. So we'll see what next season brings, but that'll all be summarized partially too within the technical memo, and then the report that we'll produce independent of that as well. So all those results kind of summarized.
Board members, questions for Jeff? Fritz?
I don't know whether this is Natural Resources or DPW, but maybe you can answer the question. The pump at Children's Beach,
Sure.
what's that?
So the pump at Children's Beach, the stormwater collection system that's there that typically pumps out into Nantucket Yacht Club through the 48-inch force main. The pumps that had been in there had both failed and were need to be properly sized and replaced. And so that's something that the DPW director has engaged an engineering company to relook at that system when it was originally installed. Those pumps were not the correct pumps. I think that's the easiest way to say it. Is for what was there. That system still goes through the regular pretreatment that it normally does. It's the water that would normally be discharging out of the 48-inch discharge into the yacht club. But it's something that the temporary measures put in place because that main running the other direction is not functional without those other pumps. So once those pumps are replaced, that system will go back to normal. So that's how it's functioning as of now.
Just a minute.
Cormac?
Board members? Public comment, Cormac.
Jeff can give you the government answer. I'll give you the critical answer. It was an absolute boondoggle.
This is related to that
Children's
pump.
Beach,
Okay.
We spent $1.5 million on that thing, upwards of, and it never worked.
We being
The town, the appropriation never worked from day one. Luckily, Rob is now in charge and can get a hold of it. And David Gray, through his expertise in some of the stormwater, because he was in charge of stormwater at one point, will help out as well. But there is no pre-treatment going on in that either. There's storm scepter units in there that haven't been cleaned out since it was installed. So it's just a classic. It's a classic stormwater movement. But again, I do want to put a light of hope in it, and that now that Rob's involved, now that we did some extra appropriations on stormwater in the past town meeting, we can take measurable steps on not just Children's Beach, but downtown as a whole. But you should all know that it was an ultimate failure of the town in terms of its monitoring and management of that system.
Actually, I'll add on to that. It was a total failure of the town, and the fact that the design and installation was not correct from the start.
True.
It was the chance of success of the system as it was installed was pretty much zero. So
When was it installed? Approximately.
that was during when the Nantucket Hotel was being remodeled.
Remember that we were out there in Children's Beach and the whole thing was being built? That's when it was installed.
it was like 2008-ish. Yeah, it was 2007.
I thought the Nantucket Inn had some involvement with that, or the Nantucket Hotel.
No,
No.
I will, it was fully the town, and the town did not get the system that they had set out for.
But in the town's defense as well, I don't want to be completely critical of the town to help Jeff out. But we're dependent on consultants, and they're supposed to do what they were supposed to do, and they might not have done conjecture here. They might not have done exactly what they're supposed to do as well.
Yeah. It was incorrect design, and then not a lot of maintenance, if any, and it's never worked. I mean, the amount of times that there are 2 pumps that were originally designed in there. You could probably count the leaks on both hands for times that both pumps were operational together. They burned out. They had problems. It is a total failure. But I agree that the process they set forward now will hopefully fix it going forward and give that system an opportunity to work and be maintained correctly.
Does the pit flood during our high water events
Oh yeah.
that the pumps are in?
So that whole system backs up in some of the water you'll see as far as, on the Easton Street that comes up even during tidal cycles. We'll flood that whole system.
Cormac, is Jeff moving forward with a stormwater plan? We heard a story like this about a catch area at the Stop and Shop that hadn't been monitored, and Winthrop was supposed to be monitoring it and maintaining it, and nothing had been maintained for years. Is Jeff working on implementing a plan that
I will tell you, as a whole, the lack of maintenance on the storm and water systems island-wide, both by the town and by private subdivisions, is completely lacking. I won't even sugarcoat it. Nothing has been maintained. Private subdivisions have installed hundreds of thousands of dollars of stormwater infrastructure that are part of their homeowners agreements that don't get maintained. We really don't even have some of the trucks necessary to maintain the systems that are installed, both privately and by the town. I would say at this point, stormwater is our most glaring problem as far as at least having a plan for managing our controllable load. And that's kind of where we're at. I know we're in the process of developing regulations that go with stormwater, and I would agree with Cormac that a good chunk of money was appropriated through town meeting to work on the stormwater system, but it has been sorely lacking for decades now, and it's going to be a lot of catch up and a lot of cleaning and maintenance and things to assess island-wide. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, and we could go on and on about it, but I'd give you a suggestion, maybe get Rob in here at some point, give you guys an overview on what, because he's got a lot of ideas. Jeff, he's got some.
Yeah, Rob is.
And then, get Andrew in here and talk about what sort of enforcement he should be doing or could be doing in terms of existing subdivision permits that are, as Jeff said, privately owned. The only enforcement mechanism is a planning board permit.
all the more reason to support like almost another department, stormwater department.
You see definitely specialized stormwater, maybe not completely separate, but you certainly see stormwater.
A division of.
DPW.
Mm.
Fairly common. A lot of communities have actually turned to even supplementing that by instituting a stormwater utility as part of it. So there's a surcharge to people that utilize those systems to help maintain and repair those, provide a funding mechanism so the municipal systems could get maintained and properly expanded and provide a proper service that is funded and isn't operational only by, budget overrides or other mechanisms. So I think that's something that, as we develop regulations to go with stormwater, that will be part of the discussion. If that's something that's a good idea for here, is really feasible for Nantucket to look at as far as maintaining our systems better. So I think I would definitely encourage you guys
stormwater to stormwater management.
Certainly. But,
It might be as well.
but as far as Andrew and the planning board, do you see anything on the radar that's, in the neighborhood where stormwater is affecting the harbor that's actually, in the proposal stages now? Is there developments that are in progress that are on your radar?
Let's just say that there's a number of existing subdivision and or commercial permits that are out there that were approved by the planning board that their stormwater system should be inspected and monitored per that permit. Whether to their benefit, they have the time to do that, the planning staff, I don't know. They probably don't.
Hmm.
But that's a thing the town as a whole has to take into consideration, that they need more people to do that. Take Stop and Shop, the new Stop and Shop, that was put in, about 3 years ago, those are storm scepter units. Anybody knows if those are clean?
Right.
Nobody does. So, there's a lot of ones out there that, the whole place behind the bank and behind the Dan's Pharmacy, that whole area,
Hmm.
that's got units that should be cleaned out. A lot of cleaning. With stormwater, so much of it is just maintenance. If it's designed correctly with the technology of the day, which is much better on pre-treatment, so much of it is maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, would that include the constructed wetland down on Washington Street?
Yeah, the constructed wetland was put in with all good intentions. Got taken over by Phragmites, although Phragmites is fairly good at uptaking nitrogen. So it does act, even though it's a invasive species nightmare, it does act as somewhat of a constructed wetland. There was no water quality monitoring as part of that constructed wetland, so we don't know if it's working. And there was no management or upkeep of that wetland going forward. So whenever I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the ones that we may be designing. It's got to be a 5, 10, 15-year plan to make sure.
Okay, thanks.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman.
Fritz.
I don't know whether this is the same thing. I'll just raise the issue because I don't have enough knowledge of exactly what it is or the circumstances, so I'll just raise the question. Whatever, I don't know whether it's stormwater, I don't know what the pump is or system is that's near Great Harbor, right across from Sale Seafood, where it pumps out, and there's an awful smell in there, and I noticed that area is closed to shellfishing, but I was down there the other day, and where that boat ramp is, and I don't know whether it's formal or informal, something coming out of that area.
This is the spot they were just talking about.
Yeah, okay.
So there's two. One's the storm scepter units that Jeff and the planning board recommended. And they've been pretty good. In Great Harbor in terms of maintaining, working with the owner.
This is whatever that steel thing is that's right.
So the shellfish closure area too, just to touch on that, we've had it for a very long time. The shellfish closure that runs from Brant Point to essentially to the Monomoy Stairs is the landmark. We've had a year-round closure for shellfish in that area for years and years, and it just relates to boat traffic and fuel docks and those things that are there, and that's the line that's across. I wouldn't anticipate that closure being lifted anytime in the near future. It's just kind of the nature of the beast in that area with the amount of traffic and activity that's there. That it's just not an area that the Division of Marine Fisheries feels that is conducive to the harvesting of shellfish for consumption. So I wouldn't anticipate that area being lifted anytime soon.
Well, and there's how many stormwater runoff outfall pipes between those two boundaries?
More than we know,
Mm.
way more than we should have.
All right, this was, we're still in natural resources report, but this discussion is all good in that area as far as I'm concerned. Any more questions on what we're talking about now? We will be bringing up more in new business with these issues. But board members,
You're talking about that there's a good chance that we're gonna come up with at least a path towards trying to maintain these, stormwater,
Yes, that is in the works.
find some kind of enforcement for the private people, things like that, okay. Just wanna see if something's gonna be done. We were informed that it happened, but, it'd be nice to see if some kind of resolution to it also.
any more public comment on natural resources? Moving into old business, hazardous materials collection and containment, continued discussion. Ginger thought it was best, even though we've made a suggestion to the Board of Selectmen, that we push forward maybe with some more suggestions and ideas for times of operation, days of operation, other materials that they may accept. I have some ideas. I've been away for a few weeks and didn't jot any down, but I'd certainly agree with continuing with some suggestions, and maybe something will come of it. Certainly having it, one Saturday a month or less, in my idea or my thoughts, is there's a lot of people who are never on this island on a Saturday. The contractors come here from a Monday to a Thursday. There are homeowners who are never here, and the days they are here, and it's all of a sudden an emergency to get rid of things in their house because it's being rented or being sold or being shown, or there certainly needs to be more access to this, and I suggest we sit down and come in with some thoughts in writing, and we'll go over this again and continue it to the next meeting.
Yeah, the main point I think that somebody made to me recently was that unless you make it easy for people, they won't do it. And that's, the easier it is to do, the more it will happen.
We live in a convenient world. So, okay. Well, I'll write down my thoughts and ideas on that to continue with, and I encourage the rest of the board to do so also. If there's no more comment on that, we'll move forward to the Chapter 91 permit for Helix moorings. An update from Fritz.
Yeah, I passed out or prepared a short history, at least as far as I know, looking at recent history, as long as I've been on the board, in terms of what the mooring regulations have said during different time periods, the most recent change being in February of 2017, when the last round of changes to the mooring regulations were made. That's summarized in the one-page report. The only update that I had is, again, it's in that report. I was able to contact a specific individual and talk to them a little bit about it. His statement was that helix moorings were not permanent moorings, and they were not therefore structures, whether they stay in the ground or don't, under Chapter 91, and that therefore no permit would be required by the state under Chapter 91. However, the town is certainly within its prerogative to write their mooring regulations to be more strict, and in this particular case, basically they have. He did offer that if somebody did want to go to the state, that they wouldn't entertain a permit. And in fact, even though you don't need a permit, they would in fact grant a permit if you applied for it and went through the process. Kind of an interesting position, but that's what I was told. So that's really the update. For the public, the background of all of this was really an effort that I had was hoping for in the past year with some sort of a pilot project for conservation moorings. The difficulty with that, and I have had more extensive conversations with Hazlitt Mooring. The difficulty with that is that they would not suggest that they be used with anything other than a helix type mooring or a deadweight mooring. That the idea of trying to connect them to a mushroom, he did not encourage it, and really said that the project should wait until there's some resolution of an alternative bottom tackle that might be available. So that's where really we are on that project, and therefore, and again, further discussion with Sheila, but she hasn't been at the last few meetings to actually talk about it. So that's kind of the where we are,
Okay.
which is nowhere.
Well, in speaking with Sheila earlier, she also mentioned this, and she's been pretty adamant that she's not a fan of the helix mooring, and permitted me to repeat that. And she's got three main reasons. One being most of the helix moorings that have been put in place in the past have been abandoned. She says the ones that are in use are using chain anyway, so they're not solving any problem as far as eliminating the chain scour. And she's always had the concern that they're a danger to scallopers if a dredge were to fetch up on one. I would certainly like to discuss this more, with Sheila here, with a couple of mooring handles here at best, and get some more feedback, some more information. Personally, the concept of them, I feel, is a wonderful concept. It's no different than the auger that's put in the ground to hold a telephone pole in place with a heavy cable. And in watching how that's installed, at least above sea level, they seem like a very simple, environmentally friendly, and as far as it sticking up and being fetched up on, I think to myself, well, why can't it be buried below the surface? And certainly divers can locate it, or it could be flagged with some type of a cloth or something that could last underwater, a piece of red rubber tubing or something like that. But anyhow, there's certainly more that can be discussed on here, and having Sheila's presence would be good. And I excuse her tonight for having a call for a capsized boat in Nantucket. So that's her call to duty, and we have to respect that. So any more discussion on this item, board members? Any thoughts on this one?
I'll wait.
Cormac? Okay. We'll continue this. Fritz, please. Recreational shellfish permits for island guides, guiding shellfish digging experiences. Any progress on that, Jeff?
Yeah, we've spoken to all the parties, and I think we're looking to set some sort of get-together up after Thanksgiving. So we'll have the few groups together to talk about that a little bit further. So that's coming soon.
Well, I'm glad you've had the time to add that to the pile on your desk. Thanks. Thoughts, discussion on aquaculture opportunities with mussel and kelp, Joe?
I think I jumped the gun a little too quickly there. There's a lot more information relative to siting, and I'm just beginning to talk to people, some of the oyster people and we need to get a hold of Jeff at some point and talk to him as well. So I figured that'll be an ongoing thing. It's not as simple as it looked.
Mhm.
You know? And there's some questions that, you know, I asked some of the oyster guys and they said, you know, mixing things makes a mess. Oysters and mussels doesn't work, at least where the water doesn't move as much. It has to do with spat and some other stuff. So I decided that the general look of it was great. The opportunities are great, but I need to be better informed before I move forward with saying anything or setting up a plan, let's say, to talk to other people, an official plan. So I'm doing it a little bit at a time.
Okay. Well, it certainly sounds exciting, Joe,
Yeah.
and I encourage you to
Interesting concept.
continue with it and put together what you will to present to us. I'm really proud of the entire board here having your little pet projects that you're interested in, and I highly encourage you to stick with it. And should we continue for the next meeting, or would you like to?
Skip a meeting.
Okay, all right. Cross that one off for old business for next week, and we'll bring it up again when Joe has some more information. Any other comments on that subject, board members? Moving on to new business, the eelgrass restoration project update. Thank you, Cormac.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking me in. I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about, Emily wanted to be here. Emily Molden is our resource ecologist, and she's been leading up all of our research programs. So she's much more familiar with this one, although I helped out.
Let me try that one out. Can I see that one? Thank you.
I'll share. All right.
Before I get into this, let me just step back and tell you what Colonial Council has been doing lately. We do have a separate donor-restricted fund called the Water Fund, which we're getting some interest and traction with, that we're now able to fund some fairly significant projects, of which we did an eelgrass health assessment, the first year of the eelgrass health assessment in Nantucket Harbor, which we have research transects in Monomoy, off Pimney's Point, Fulling Mill, Quays, Pocomo, and Wallwinnet. And that is working with researchers from Boston University to do a fairly sizable holistic study of our eelgrass health, from all the sort of morphological blade length characteristics to everything that's in and around that eelgrass bed. So it's a good place to start to get that data. We'll be doing that consistently, I hope, funding dependent going forward. Probably expand it to other areas with assistance from Natural Resources and advice from Natural Resources Department. Maybe I'd like to expand it to the other side as well, to some of the bends on the other side of Clifton, and potentially bring it to Nantucket as well. So gives us great baseline data. We got great baseline data of water quality, and we're working on water quality because we want to protect the marine ecosystem, of which eelgrass is the fundamental plant, climax community. So it's good to look at the end result of the eelgrass as it relates to water quality as well. So that's one project that we're doing. Another project that we're doing, which is kind of interesting, we're doing a stable isotope project. I'm a layman in this, so I'll present it in a very layman's way. You can essentially analyze the eelgrass and through isotope analysis determine if the nitrogen that they're feeding on is predominantly from septic or from fertilizer. So we're going to be looking in certain areas. We have been looking in certain areas just to see that correlation, and that'll give us some ideas going forward. And then also as sewer gets expanded and as septic systems transfer over to IA systems, which is the past 3 years for the Board of Health regulation, and those will be going forward, more and more of those come online. It'll be interesting to see the correlations of those as well. again, all of our research that we do, it's always trying to, it's not research just sitting on a shelf, it's trying to effectuate appropriate policy, bringing ideas to you guys, regulatory change, and then land use awareness. Those are 2 eelgrass projects. Stormwater, we've been doing some stormwater work. Emily's been analyzing all the stormwater outfalls and the stormwater systems, and that's really what brought our attention to the lack of maintenance of these systems. Just simple catch basin cleaning. The amount of organics, leaf litter that's going out, and these storm basins that's just going out and then decomposes, and that nitrogen and those nutrients get released into the harbor. By and large, itself might not be that significant, but in its totality, as it relates to all the nutrient contributions, it's a thing. So we've been looking at one, trying to have a steady stormwater water quality monitoring, which is very difficult to do because a lot of our storms happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you want to get that first flush, and we don't even know if we're going to get a significant storm until 7 o'clock that night. So it's difficult to really get good baseline data on stormwater, but we're going to try and keep doing it and do the best we can. So with working with the new DPW head, we've been looking at certain areas for restoration. We haven't been in the Consu Springs discussion because luckily with Jeff and with Rob and the land bank, they have now been able to hopefully take that up another notch with combining some new ideas and some new pre-treatments. We have the construction money ready. We appropriated it to the town meeting years ago. It's just got to go forward, and I think, gosh, I think I saw the guys out there the other day when I was driving by, some of the AE guys. So that's a good one. That'll be on its way. What we need to do, I'm sort of rambling, sorry, but for the stormwater, it's not just monitoring and looking at it, it's looking at those outfalls on a wholesale level and say, how can we improve the water quality that's going out that outfall? And what sort of pre-treatment can we do? Can we do constructing wetlands? Can we do pre-treatment? Certain BMP structures, things of that nature. So we're basically going all the way from the rotary at, what's their names? I'm sorry. Yeah, Otison's all the way down to Burns Beach and seeing which one we can deal with. So Consu Springs is one that's hopefully going to be off the list. The one that we just hired Horsley Winton to look at is the Town Pier parking lot. That has, to my knowledge, I didn't even know this, but there's actually infiltrators below it. So stormwater catch basins that then go through infiltration units, which leach into the ground, but if those are full or not operational, it goes right out to the outfall that's next to the marine park. So we've actually found out through our investigations that those got put in 98. Manholes weren't even fought since 98, since they got them. So they've never been cleaned, so they're inoperable, they just don't work. This is classic stormwater on there. It's just what happens. Things go in, nobody pays. The times are changing. I think it's going to be. So what we'd love to do with that is actually maybe do a constructed wetland where that wetland actually already exists, a little pocket park there that's between what I call, we used to call the compound building, but it's the annex now, that potentially would have some sort of nutrient treatment with vegetation plants, basically creating, enhancing that wetland that's there right now. That would have a first flush thing, and then it would go out. That's what we're trying to do, is provide 25%, 50% design plans to the town that then they can take another level and complete those plans to 100% and then go to the town voters for appropriation. We're doing that with the Town Pier parking lot, and then we're also doing that with significant stormwater plans out there as well. So in summary, before I get into the eelgrass, we're doing a lot of this work where we're trying to actually use our dollars in a proactive way to assist the town to fill in some of these gaps. So the eelgrass that we're doing beyond those 2 projects is this really exciting eelgrass restoration project with Emily. Worked on the permitting with Jeff throughout the summer, and then we've been working with our institutional helper out at Boston University, where they came down this past fall. Before you see the eelgrass shellfish exclusion zone, which we're able to create through Sheila, they planted with a number of volunteers. Josh helped it out. Josh Eldridge is on my board and also volunteered and helped out. this area to transplant from Hussey Shoal and then take those and replant them in this area off of Second Pier. The water quality is sufficient in this area. What we believe happened is certainly degradation of the eelgrass bed through time, but there's a very significant shoaling event in 2012, 2013, which wiped out that entire eelgrass bed. And we believe that that water quality is healthy enough that if we just jumpstart it a little, it'll get going and kick it back in. You're not going to get Tucker-Nuck-Matic style eelgrass just because our water quality is not that good, the boat traffic, some other things that are involved in that area, but it's certainly you'll get eelgrass habitat that is suitable for marine life. As they went and dove it the third time we went in successive weeks over a period of a month. And by that last week, they dove the first transect, and there was already lateral shoots coming out, and there was already winter flounder that was swimming in and around the eelgrass. It's amazing. I mean, it is the canary in the coal mine. It's the bellwether species of our underwater ecosystem in that 1 foot to 10 foot zone. It's pretty exciting. So, in all, we're trying to over the next spring and next fall get about 20,000 square feet, I think, half acre in all. And it's not just looking at, it's not just trying to regrow eelgrass. It's really looking at how our water quality, our total maximum daily load numbers that we're trying to meet, how the correlation of our goals with our water quality meets up with eelgrass regrowth and a healthy eelgrass bed. So we can use this as a test case saying, yeah, the water quality numbers, we hypothetically thought that it would regrow eelgrass to this level, and now we see that it did, or didn't. So we might have to do some adjustment of our goals. Hopefully we won't, but it's going to be a great, interesting project.
Cormac, when you mention shoaling, immediately I think of how all the inland harbor beaches have eroded, and literally millions of yards of beach sand have washed into the harbor from Cotuh and from the northern shore here. And when an eelgrass bed gets smothered with beach sand, is it still suitable to sustain the eelgrass? Is it viable for the eelgrass to survive in a sandbar?
You're almost over my pay grade here, but I think from what I talked with our consultants, and Emily would give you a straight answer, but I'm fairly humble and honest when it comes to this stuff. I don't want to pretend I know. Eelgrass is fairly resilient in terms of shoaling. It can withstand some shoaling events, but if you completely smother it, it's not gonna grow back. And that's what happened in the shoaling event. We have people in that Shimo area that say that when they went out to their moorings the next year, it was almost 2 feet shallower that the shoaling happened. Yeah. And Blair Perkins think it was just a big sandbar that was off and that moved down and showed that whole area.
Well,
Or maybe the northern extent of that little bit of Hussey Shoal that didn't have eelgrass on it. All the sand came pushed down there. That's why, but to jump back on the soapbox, that's why it's so important to protect what we have and to promote appropriate water quality, because there's a lot of variables outside of our control. Look at the eelgrass beds that existed on North Shore and outside of Cotuh.
yes.
Those are no longer there. Water quality is great, but those are no longer there because of shoaling.
Mm-hmm.
So there's natural events, weather events, natural stuff that we can't control that could wipe out eelgrass.
We can't control it, but when does it come to a point when we take action and look into some, say, low impact dredging with a diver and a suction pump and remove the sand until you get back down to that muddy bottom, pump that sand back up on the beach where it came from?
I defer to Jeff and the other folks on that one.
So I'll actually throw it. So one of the things that we've been talking about doing, and we've kind of asked for a rough estimate in cost, is we've been talking to Dr. Borelli from the Center of Coastal Studies, and really looking at Nantucket Harbor primarily, and a little bit in Manatee Harbor, but it's a lower priority, to establish what he calls a sediment budget for the harbor. So it's something where they look at the bathymetry and how the shoreline is put together and the composition of it, and they essentially are looking to establish where the nodal points are. So nodal points in sediment transport are where you have like you have a net zero. So it's the spot where it goes in either direction, and establishing that for the harbor. And I think some of that will help us better refine our kind of our dredge plan and have that as a component that goes in, because I tend to agree that looking at those areas and taking some proactive steps would be helpful, and also, you know, putting that together with circulation and other things that they put together as part of that whole sediment budget would be extremely helpful, and something where you can start to pair up water quality data and some of the data that we've collected and some of the data the Land Council's collected related to light penetration in some of those areas, and really start to pinpoint areas for work on eelgrass, or areas that may be more appropriate for shellfish or something that's there, and really hone that in. That's kind of I think at this point, knowing what that budget is kind of a big missing piece for what's going on, because I agree. I mean, Code 2 has shifted quite a bit over time, and you can see the Cuspids bids are projecting more and more, and Pocono more and more, and figuring out how that's moving and where you might get more bang for your buck dredging certain areas because of the way sediment moves. Is probably something that's coming. Just hopefully, we'll hopefully get kind of a rough estimate back for what that may cost. But my guess is you're probably looking at least $250,000 to get that study all put together and done by the time you get all the field work. That was kind of a really ballparky number, but it could be more, and that would just be for Nantucket Harbor. That wouldn't even be for Nantucket. And then the other thing I asked him was just kind of pie in the sky what the sediment budget would be, how they put that together for all of coastal Nantucket, and what the cost of that would be. So I think that'd be really interesting for a lot of other different pieces. But the main harbors first.
There's a way to fund that too. I mean, there's hopes that that sediment could one day end up in front of somebody's house. People that.
Right. Right. The material's out there, and I'm glad it's on your radar, Jeff, and that.
I mean, and I'll even say we've been contacted already by the Pocono Homeowners Association is really interested for their area.
Particularly those two spits.
Yeah, and it's no secret that SPPF has also talked to us about doing some of that work, because they're obviously very interested in any source of sand that's moving around. If their projects tend to go forward, they're obviously going to be looking. So I agree with Cormac. I mean, I think it's there. I think we just need to know, you know, what the top of the thermometer is going to look at, that we can start to color in and figure out if we can get it all covered. And if it's a good enough number, we may be able just to do it through regular town appropriations.
If you're ever in earshot, you know, of some history, I have some photos from the 80s of what the dunes used to look like on the harbor side of Co2.
I think that would probably be a component of what they're looking at, because obviously they like to track historical shorelines and do profiles and things, and then historical bathymetry, if they can get it and move forward. If anyone hasn't had a chance to see any of his presentations, and there are other groups that do it too, they're really interesting. I know they did one upstairs with the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, and I think he did a second one for someone else that was filmed, but he explains it far better than I ever could. But it's
Who's he again?
Dr. Mark Borelli. They're really interesting.
Center for Coastal Studies out of Provincetown.
But you see him too. Sediment budgeting is something that's, I don't want to say is new, but it's something that's becoming a lot more common. So hopefully that will also keep the cost a little more under control.
Fritz?
Just two questions. first one, I guess, for Cormac. So is this an area where there won't be any moorings? Hopefully.
First and foremost, we worked with Sheila to get a shellfish exclusion zone put up. So there are 6 buoys that mark it. JC and Vince have been passing out smaller versions of these
Yeah.
cards as shellfish ones to scalpers. That's the biggest thing, is just not to have the near-term impacts from the dredges on a very young bed that's being pushed in that doesn't have that root establishment. Once it has a root establishment, it should be okay, but most likely the scalpers aren't even gonna go there because there's nothing there, there's no ever anything, so. But your question on moorings, no, we put this just to the east of those moorings that are off the second pier, and Sheila had intimated, this is secondhand, to Emily that there wouldn't be any future, I think she did, that there wouldn't be any future moorings in that area.
Okay. So you managed to get the site
To add
so
to
that,
that quickly, the original area that was permitted for relocation just caught a corner of some areas with moorings, and Sheila and Emily worked together to shift it to
Good.
make sure that they were avoiding those impacts.
so we kind of got there. Got there anyway. Yeah. Okay. Good. And the second question I had was, what was the second question?
Well, think about it. I'm thinking back to arriving on this board 4 years ago and how the discussion about eelgrass transplanting was there, but there was no desire to move forward until the water quality could sustain the eelgrass, and this sounds encouraging to me. That, I mean, you're throwing this out there as a test site, but you must feel pretty good that the water quality isn't dire to the point where you wouldn't do this. And I don't want to give anybody out there the false sense that our water quality is great and we can drop our guard. But this is encouraging that you're willing to test, pilot, program this, and
This is a pilot program as it specifically relates to this area itself. The data that Jeff's department has collected, this is one of the stations, just right off the second pier is one of the stations that the department has collected data on for years. So compiling all that data, it looks from that standpoint that it was sufficient for eelgrass regrowth on transplant project. We did some additional light data to determine if there was enough light penetration in that area, and it indicated that it wasn't as well. So, but again, this is probably an area with the best water quality, except for if we were doing it on Hussey Shoal or out in the channel. There's a reason why Hussey Shoal has the best eelgrass in the harbor, because it has the most circulation coming right through and the best water quality. This is just the tail end, southern end of over the smaller channel of Hussey Shoal, so it does have good water quality. You get to the boat basin, as Jeff's analysis suggests, and it's going down in that direction. You get past Kenney's Point, it's okay, but it's not great. You get to some of these other near shore areas going out Fulling Mill, Opus, it's not conducive, in our opinion, to grow eelgrass. So there's one area that could be tested for this. Right now, is what we're saying.
Okay.
So no, there certainly is not a harbor-wide, yay, we're doing great on water quality.
I think just to speak for our department is, I think what we're excited about the project is, if the transplant takes and it works and it's a method that's successful, that over time, if we start to see gains in water quality, it can reach the same kind of parameters that are there, that it's an option to look at and to see if it was successful. But I completely agree with Cormac that it's something that is years away from areas where are unless
Right.
sort of
That's
active
encouraging.
comes to fix up the water quality issues.
But I always like to sort of say these, sort of summarize these conversations, whether it's before boards or before people that are out living in the harbor watershed. You go off island, you do not substantial, very good eelgrass compared to other areas. So, and water quality by and large is fairly good compared to other areas. You could say, okay, then we don't need to necessarily do something. No, that means that we have to be as adamant and vigorous as possible to protect what we have. And that's sort of what I do say. I just don't like leaving people on this dire note that everything's horrible. Oh my God, no, we got pretty good stuff. It's just indications, trend lines have been going down for eelgrass, presence absent, and water quality in certain areas have certainly trended down. So we got to do all we can do to reverse those numbers.
Just looking at the color-coded maps of the past showing the decrease in the size of the eelgrass beds, and
That's pretty astounding.
it's huge, and knowing that the entire Upper Harbor, and well, when it has no eelgrass to speak of, and in the 70s it was a habitat for some of the largest bay scallops on Earth. So bringing that out there more as a reminder that there's no stopping. Have to keep moving in the direction, and you guys.
They're using this as a positive test case, and look, even if it will regrow, it's not going to regrow to the caliber that all the old timers tell us that Nantucket Harbor used to look like. That it used to be 4 feet 4 foot tall eelgrass. It used to look like Nantucket, outer portions of Nantucket.
Yeah,
It used to look like.
yeah,
So,
yeah. It was scary.
back there,
It was.
you have to do a lot of circulation stuff, a lot of very large scale surgery stuff.
I remember my question.
Recollection, Fritz.
The changes to the harbor in terms of what am I thinking about? The wall, the
The jetties.
jetty. Has there been any? I'm in a senior moment. Any conclusion? Is it too early for any conclusions about what the change to the jetty is doing vis-a-vis water quality and or sand movement? Too early?
Anecdotal, the velocity has increased.
Yeah. I think one of the concerns that we've had too, and something that we've asked the Corps to look at is, we've been concerned with the jetties being made whole and not as porous as they used to be. There's some thought that it may have exacerbated some of our winter flooding issues because the water wasn't able to get out as quickly. So we've asked them to
Okay.
go back and look at that, but it's too early for any water quality.
Well, just knowing that there's increased circulation is certainly a positive
Well, I think that,
result.
I mean, I think the flow through that area has definitely increased. Its impacts to total harbor circulation are probably much less. But I think that's something that, as we look through doing an actual sediment budget process, getting updated circulation information as part of that is something that will be extremely helpful.
You can still do a lot of new bathymetry stuff, and then you can use the new numbers out of the jet. But yeah.
Ginger?
Just one sort of thought. I'm looking at all these bulkheads and groins, some going back probably to the 1920s, and wondering if that would change some of the shoaling effects. If there's energy transfer off of those.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know enough, site specific. But if you have a bulkhead, over time, it's going to undermine the sand deeper and deeper and deeper, and that means it's going to be deeper and deeper and deeper going out, and it's not going to be super eelgrass growth. Over time, that's just sort of anecdotal.
Well, it's a typical process. I mean, the question is whether it applies here or not, really. Yeah. Likewise. I mean, I don't know either.
We do have eelgrass growth off of quays
maybe a different angle to the currents, though.
I think that'd be very site specific.
Board members, Cormac, have you summed up your?
I'm good, thanks for the invite. I apologize that I don't keep in contact with you guys as much as I do, but, you know,
Well, that's all right.
I see you guys
It's-
outside of the meetings, and I'm always working with Jeff.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Cormac. Very informative, and thank you so much for what you do out there. Questions, comments from the public? Sir, your name again.
It's Ken Brassfield. I don't know how formal our conversation this is, but I've had kind of a germ of an idea that I wanted to discuss with you and other learned people, and that is this, that I don't really know where we would all put the importance of the scallop harvest on the pecking order of things that are important in Nantucket, and that's one, that's kind of a question. There's an awful lot of knowledge and expertise on the island about bay scallops. You know, people like you, the fishermen, our scientists, all the good things that we're all doing and trying to do and spending money on and time. There's no one person though that really has scallops as his principal focus that can kind of play some role in coordinating and all these different activities. It's just a germ of an idea, but I'm just wondering if you want to get something done, you got to have somebody that it's a critical task. You know, it's somebody that's responsible. And you know, I've been to so many meetings. I've done a small scallop wholesale here, but this is our 29th season, and I have heard so many, you know, good ideas, things that are done and everything. But I don't sense that there's any one person really pushing, you know, really that knows what everybody's doing. You know, Cormac and his organization, they do good work in the town, and Tara, and you know, they do good stuff. And the fishermen, there are a lot of very knowledgeable fishermen here that, I mean, yeah, you're never going to get Ed Stojak to a meeting. You'll get Carl to a meeting, but I mean, they know a lot about problems and issues, and they have a lot of ideas. My sense is that we're not really using all the various kinds of resources that we have in a focused way that's really moving toward restoring the harvest that we've had for decades. But it's just as I say, it's conversational. I don't have any real specific thought, except that just an observation that I think that's generally, if you want to get something done, you got to put somebody in charge of it.
So basically, you're saying or suggesting maybe we think about having a scallop mayor.
That's the idea. It's more saying you should do it than like I'm wondering
Yeah.
maybe it would make sense. That's kind of where I am.
Thanks again, Cormac.
Thank you, Cormac.
Yeah, Bryce, all these things are important parts of this complex, very complex picture. It's just something I would encourage us all to think about.
We spoke a little earlier over at the voting booths, and you got me to thinking a little bit, you know, about it. And you know, my dad raised me around the waterfront, and been on a scallop boat since I was in my single digits, and I can always remember through 45 years of history of that the scallops have cyclical seasons, and they used to say about every 7 years there'd be a real bad season. And whether that's happening more now, I think maybe a few years ago was a very shy harvest. this year is projected to be a shy harvest. With the decrease in eelgrass beds for their habitat, and I'm also quickly doing math. Was it 2 years ago the hatchery did not have any release because of the.
The construction.
So would this season be that year's release if there had been a release? Is this the year we're into where there was no release, Jeff?
No,
Just-
this year would be the one where there was very limited production. It was kind of the break-in year. But I would also say too that what the hatchery's role is to supplement the natural population that's there.
Yes.
And the hatchery will simply never produce the amount that the wild population can produce. It's just not.
And I realize
We don't have numbers to do it.
it's also immeasurable between the two unless you had fluorescent spray paint on them. But
Not to get, we're actually working on a study. We've kind of partnered up with UMass and the Shellfish Association to start potentially looking at ways to identify hatchery scallops from wild scallops to kind of get some population numbers. But I'll have some more to add to this, but I'll let Ken finish.
boy, an awful lot of research involved in all of this. Amazing amount of research and.
Yeah, with all that, a little bit of silo effect. But I don't believe there is a predictable mathematical pattern to the harvest. For example, in the late 90s, we had 2 harvests. The last 2 years of the 90s, it was around 5,000 or 6,000 and around 4,000 to 5,000 bushels. And then 2000 came along, and nobody saw this coming. I mean, nobody saw it coming. It went back up over 10,000, and we had a 32,500 bushel harvest in about 2005. Okay, last year we had the best harvest we had in about 5 years. It was well under 13,000 bushels, which was about twice the 2 years before, which were around 6,000 bushels. So it's not like, I would love it if you could say every 7 years it falls off the cliff, otherwise it's pretty good, but it's just all over the place.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, could I?
Ginger, please.
Okay. Well, our family goes back scalloping for a long time, and although I haven't been involved myself for more than 25 years, as far as fishing regularly, one thing about the cycle is the scallop lifespan, and a lot of which is 2-3 years, and so that's very different from the calico scallop, and they've done some studies to try and figure out that scallops have been very interesting in terms of longevity studies, which has implications for other people's health as well. I would just my personal observation is that we've lost some of the genetic diversity in the harbor. There are a lot of different questions which different researchers have looked into. I mean, there's the big controversy for a long time was, the nub versus the anti-nub, and we've done some, there's been some good solid research saying that those nubs are very important in order to have the spawn at different times of years to enable the scallop population as a whole to adapt to the different conditions that we have from year to year. So I'm not sure, that fishermen are very independent, and I'm not sure that having a scallop czar would really work on Nantucket. I think it's a everybody needs to chip away at their piece of the puzzle, and
Diane Coe said
So-
something that I've never forgotten. This was 25 years ago. She said, if we will take care of the scallops will take care of us. And there's nobody really taking care of the scallops. No one, the community is, we're trying to.
Jim seems to be about as close as possible in terms of understanding the environment. I'm not saying you should take on another job, but you're doing it in essence.
Well, I mean, not to hop in, I think it relates to is, you know, there's not necessarily one person that's assigned to, you know, you're assigned to base scallops, you're assigned to cohogs, or those kinds of things. And what it really comes down to is, you know, there's a limited amount of habitat and resources for base scallops, and that's really, you know, we see it, and, you know, I kind of agree with Ken that obviously the long-term trend in base scallops populations on Nantucket, while it's definitely erratic, the definite long-term trend is in decline. I mean, you see bushel counts in the 80s of over 100,000 bushels in a season, which compared to now, you know, 2 years ago, we were at like 6,500 bushels. So there's obviously been a market decrease, and, you know, when we get excited about, you know, 12,500 bushels last year, you know, you're 10 times less than some of those big harvests. So the long-term trend is bad, but I think a lot of it also relates to, it's obviously a much more stressful environment for base scallops and other shellfish than it was in 1982 and 1984 when those big harvests came out. I mean, I think we're all working towards it. This kind of leads into the public comment that I wanted to bring today, because it's not really part of our report, but it's something where this year in this year's base scallops for the first time ever, I mean, today was day 4 of commercial season. We've been keeping track. We've already had over a dozen fishermen ask about potentially closing areas or closing the season because we're seeing such high seed ratios in some spots. And there's just a lack of availability. And it's something where we spent the better part of the day out on the water with Tara and JC, kind of seeing what they came up with. And I think, you know, the way we're approaching it now and getting that firsthand information from so many that are fishing. I mean, the fleet is not big. I mean, yesterday I want to say there was probably 15 individuals fishing. It was small.
Altogether,
Yeah.
town and then down to,
Yeah.
it started out about 25 or 30.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, there's been some weather too, so that's not surprising, but I think
Yeah.
what we're looking to do is kind of continue collecting some information, but I think before the end of the week this week, we want to try to get kind of a roadmap going forward of what we're thinking as far as this season and kind of into the future, and maybe some new ways to look at it, because I something needs to be done to address scallops. So it may be something that, if we can get that to you guys, obviously I don't want to put more on anyone's plate, but if there may be an opportunity to get together even before the next meeting to kind of put a plan into action and start a discussion with you guys and the fishermen and people there, because I think it's something that we've never had people ask that question of the department before on November the 6th. And it's been going on since the start, and it's something that is concerning and something that we want to make sure that we're addressing it, but also addressing it in a way that's based on facts, based on data, and based upon a plan that everyone can understand and goes forward. And I think that's what we're looking to do here relatively quickly, because we obviously want to arm you guys with the best ability to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen that we can, and then that our department will put forward, and that hopefully, you know, we can take to places like the Shellfish Association and say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we think we should be doing, or let's talk about what we should be doing, and let's all to agree that this is seemingly the best path forward, knowing that you'll have disagreement. There will be people that are, you know, nothing's wrong, we're going to keep going or doing what we're doing, and, you know, by no means am I saying now that we need to shut it down or close or do it. I think we're a long ways from having all the information to talk about it, but to be 4 days in and already talking about it, knowing that the vineyard has already closed a number of areas for base scallop harvest this year already. They delayed some of their season starts as well. It's a red flag, and, you know, I think I appreciate that Ken brought it up, because it's something where I think we're gonna have to all have real hard discussions about how bay scallops are being harvested and how bay scallops, what are sustainably harvested. Because I don't think that we want this year to be the last year that bay scallops are sold, the next year, and the year after, the year after that. We have to make hard decisions about how we're managing the fishery, and I think addressing this season is a short-term solution, but long-term, really looking at doing regular stock assessments and habitat evaluations and really actively managing the fishery and talking about limits and seasons and, as much as I hate to say it, taking it from a fishery that's always kind of taking care of itself and something that not over-regulated, but to make decisions for the fishery based upon what the fishery can bear.
More heavily monitored.
It's going to be more monitored. I mean, I know it's something that we hear a lot is, you know, the phrase that they're all going to die anyways comes up a lot. You know, I get that from a lot of it, and I think we all understand that, but I think it's also looking at it as what level of biomass do we need to make sure is maintained and allowed to have the opportunity to reproduce enough to maintain genetic diversity and sustainable populations that the habitat can hold. I mean, we spend a lot of time doing water quality, a lot of time measuring eelgrass. That we do it for things like striped bass, where we, you know, look at age classes and recruitment. That we've never really buckled down and really looked hard at what's the actual stock within the harbor. You know, what level of recruitments are we getting harbor-wide? You know, we had a big spat event last year that was flushed out the harbor. We lost those individuals and they weren't able to recruit to the natural population. We're kind of at that point where we're on the bad end of the spectrum for harvestable numbers. How do we rebuild to get to a point where, I mean, I remember when I first started with Dave Franzuto, you know, 15,000 bushels was the number that everyone was like, we get to 15, everything's good, everyone's happy. We haven't hit 15 in 4 or 5 years and haven't been close in a couple of those years. I'm not saying that number is based in science, it's a lot of anecdotal, but again, if you draw it, and if it was my retirement fund that had the same trend line as bay scallops, I'd be working until I died. So we need to figure out ways to get that line to turn around, and I think habitat work is super helpful, but I think also taking a more active role in looking at it and saying in September, let's talk about what the limits for recreational and commercial are going to be based upon numbers that we know are real, or what we're projecting is real from actual data that's collected year to year, and how do we implement that? And I think that's, we'd like to get a rough draft to you guys of that as soon as possible to address it in the short term. So if we have the discussion now, if then we're revisiting it in December, January, February, we're not caught in that situation I feel like we're always caught in, where we're trying to make decisions or get to the point where we're requesting to make decisions, and it's a, well, you guys need to wait 3 weeks to do this or 6 weeks to keep it active. So that's a very long speech from me, but that's what we're looking to develop here before the end of the week. And I know it's something we started on a bit ago, but we're really targeting to get something into your guys' hands here quickly to at least start the conversation on, let's be paying more attention than we have been, and let's take better steps to manage our bay scallops.
You know, Peter Boyce used to kind of keep up with what was going on in Long Island Sound, and I wonder if anybody's doing that today.
So,
Hi.
yeah, Tara talks to, there's a researcher down there, his name's Dr. Steve Tuttlebach, he's down there. I know even this last week we talked to him quite a bit about the monitoring procedures and the way that he was assessing bay scallop stocks in Long Island Sound, because they've had a very successful restoration program there. So it's something that we've been talking to him, and we have kind of a working relationship with him to say what worked for you, what didn't work for you, you know, what scale were you able to roll that out at. So we talked to him a lot. We talked to Dale Levitt at Roger Williams, who's been helpful in those two. So we've reached out to anyone and everyone that we know and that we've tapped in before to help, and have helped with the Shellfish management plan. And a lot of this stuff isn't science that we're trying to invent or do stuff. It's stuff that's been done before. It's just a matter of scoping it for here and putting it to the scale that we need here. But again, I think it was just more of a, we've been working on it, but we kind of accelerated and picked up the pace based upon what the fishermen came to us and said. A lot of them don't like to come to meetings like this because they feel like if they're the one that stands up and say, we think there's a problem or we think we should do this, that they're gonna go to the boat tomorrow and they're gonna find them on the bottom. So, I think that's why we're happy to put something forward to start a discussion about it. And hopefully those guys will come in and participate, help us onto a good path. 'Cause I think we need to be there sooner than later.
Trish?
Ken, I think it's a great idea. And obviously, my first thought was obviously it's something the Shellfish Association could help sponsor or fund or whatever. Whether my first thought was, until you started talking about what you were going to be doing, my first thought was, gee, maybe the Shellfish Association could actually get somebody, not a staff, but fund somebody to be sort of keeping all of this data. So getting data from you, and now you're talking about having the department do it, which is fine too. The second thought that I then had was reminds me. I'm from the Midwest. It reminds me a little bit about what agricultural colleges do for agriculture and that type of thing, which is you've got scientists. Somebody sits to collects all this data and puts out reports. And I don't know whether there's a corollary in the shellfishing industry. In other words, I don't know whether Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute or something like that, if you help them fund it or something, somebody would take on the project of collecting all this data, issuing reports. In other words, almost like a monthly or quarterly letter, which is...
The NSA is sitting on a very large pile of money.
Who?
The
Oh, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
Frequently they ask how they can spend it.
So what's interesting though is some of that stuff happens. You typically find most of that reporting and that level of assessment is done for finfish. For whatever reason, finfish is always one. I mean, you can go get yearly updates on age class data for striped bass, and that comes out from both NOAA and Division of Marine Fisheries in some cases. Shellfish has typically always been, like a better term, kind of the bastard child of all of those things, because it's something where...
And for Nantucket, it's more localized.
Yeah,
it's not like...
It's a very niche fishery where you can go out and you're in the open water and you're fishing for squid and striped bass and all these herring and things that are there. The smaller, I hate to use the word more boutique fisheries, but it's really what it is, more of a boutique fishery, has always been kind of left up to municipalities, and it's something that, today, one of the ends I've been working on for our group is kind of going through regulatory histories, and the state limit on bay scallops is 10 bushels, has been 10 bushels probably since everyone here had, no gray hair, and it's something where it's been set, and you talk to them, and I talked to my Kiki about it, and you ask the question, well, why is it 10? How do we decide 10? And you get back into the history, and you're like, well, they decided it was 10 at one point because that's what guys were able to get in a normal day fishing with a relatively normal effort, and they were doing it reliably, right? So when they set the regulation, it made total sense, right? It was a day's worth of fishing for the average fisherman to go out and get, 10 bushels under their state license. Everyone was happy.
My recollection is that it was restricted from 12.
Yep, that was the big drop, and then Nantucket went to 5 locally. But it's something where it's been fueled by harvest and not by someone actually assessing. Where you see regulations on other fisheries, I'll use squid as an example, where they set a quota in tons, and they actively monitor that. I mean, it's millions of tons, but they actively monitor those populations to get an assessment to create a limit, and that limit fluctuates from year to year based upon how they model that population. I'm not saying we have to get to that level with shellfish, because it's involved, but we need to do a better job, and it's, you know, kind of incumbent upon us is we need to do a better job in assessing our health of our populations to really base what our limits are on what's really available without damaging habitat or taking more than we should. And that's, I don't know, to me I feel like it's, you know, putting up the big boy pants and really moving into real fisheries.
Do we have a number of what the Nantucket scallop industry generates in revenue a year? Probably do. You probably know.
Which year?
Huh? Well, I mean,
It was $1 million industry for years, but, you know, up and down. But I mean, it's, you know, it's one of those things that it's not just the dollar revenue, which is not to be underestimated or trivialized, but it's sort of part of our culture. I mean, there are people,
Well, yeah,
you
no,
know, and I know, they're coming up in October and going bush raking for a couple of
right.
days is their favorite thing to do ever. I'd like to add one more thing. I'm not gonna pretend to speak for the other wholesalers, but just speaking for me, if the thinking is that it would be better for the scallops to close this season down and let the seed have the best shot at whatever it is, I would be happy to say let's end it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to get some more facts and information put together,
Early days.
but it's something where, again, we base a lot of our direction on where we go, and when you get half the guys that are going, that are expressing really significant concerns with the amount of seed, the fact that we are into, I mean, we're 4 days in, so you know, that's why I said pump the brakes a little bit, but, very few guys come in with limits. No one is even trying to crown because they're barely making boxes as it is. I mean, it's one of those things, like, when it's good, 5 boxes, everyone's trying to push it a little bit and get what they can. Is you're watching guys come in now with 3 boxes and they're an inch from the top each, and they're out for 8 hours, and they come in because they're just like, I don't feel like being out there anymore today. On the 4th day of the season, that it's not been heard of really too many times before. So those guys come in and say they're seeing a lot of seed, and they're concerned that obviously, you know, the little red siren light goes off in our office, and it's, you know, all right, let's really buckle down in a hurry and figure out what's good, and, you know, let's get as much information from those guys as we can, and let's get all the wholesalers and get the Shellfish Association, get everyone involved, and let's make a real decision that's something that affects the industry for scholarship. So
I think when you got more scallops the last day of last season than the first day of this season, that says something.
yeah, that
says a lot.
So, and some of the things we look at too, I mean, we've really started to look at effort as well. I mean, it's one of those, I always tell everyone, bushel counts are really nice to get general trends, but it's always interesting to know how many guys we're going. You know, if you get 1,000 bushels and it takes 1,000 guys, or if you get 1,000 bushels and it takes 20 guys, it's a different scenario. So it's something where, and I think Ken hit the nail on the head, is the same amount of guys going at the end of last year is going today, that those guys had more scallops in a shorter amount of time than those guys did today. And that is, that's concerning, to say the least. So, we'll probably, like I said, we're trying to get things to you guys here quickly so we can get to you guys, to a board of selectmen if something needs to happen, or if we need to talk about, I think anything's on the table, area closures, time closures, reductions, nothing, if that's what it kind of bears out to be and the sale plays out. But I think we want to make the best decisions we can for the health of the habitat and the health of the fishery. So we'll be back soon.
Well, Jeff, you know how to get in touch with all of us, and
So with
the-
that too, I just wanted to add, and I apologize for interrupting. If you guys do decide that it's something that needs to be scheduled in advance, open meeting law requirements are exempted for the purposes of scheduling meetings. So if you guys feel you need a meeting in the interim, I know your next meeting's in 2 weeks, so it's not like it's that far away. But if you feel that it's so pressing in before, you only need 48 hours to post that, and you guys can all communicate freely about, are you available on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. That is exempted from open meeting law as long as you're not going over the substance of the matter. So if it's just for the purpose of setting a date or time, that's possible. We're happy to help facilitate that as well. If you guys, when you get the information back from us, feel that that's necessary, we can help make that happen. Like I said, we're trying to get the red flag to come back down and have a really clear path of action for everybody. And hopefully there's a little bit of both. And we absolutely don't want to stop people from making a living. We want to be smart about it too.
well, maybe a few more days of feedback. And do we have another northeaster in the works? I mean, the fisherman's always waiting for the wind to blow the eelgrass off of a mystery bed that produces.
Like I said, it's 4 days.
Yeah.
So now guys could be like, something happened, wind blew out a different direction.
Well, and this is how it went with the extension last year. I mean, it was a last minute thing, and it did get expedited, but a lot of people questioned, why didn't you come before us sooner? And the fishermen really weren't quite sure that the stock was so great until there was a wind in the middle of March and uncovered what seemed to be a considerable amount of more harvestable
Yeah, so I mean, that's
product.
we're kind of looking at that, and I think what we really want to do is just, again, be open and honest with everyone and say, this is how we're going to be reviewing it, and this is how we're going to look at it as far as our department goes, as far as chat goes, and this is the roadmap going forward, and if we hit a trigger that's there, that maybe it's, the conversation changes a little bit to what should we be doing or not. So, I always think discussions like this are always healthy.
Yeah.
With the fishery's best interest in mind. So hopefully we get to something, or I told my wife before I left the house, maybe we'll all wake up tomorrow and some divine light will shine on the harbor and all of our problems will be fixed and scallops will be everywhere and we won't have to talk about it anymore. But
Well, hearing that there's a lot of seed isn't a bad thing
not at all.
because they didn't report much for seed at the end of last season at all. So,
it's tricky. It's tricky when they recruit and how they do it.
were there any seed strandings at this last wind?
No, we went out and looked and we didn't find anything significant.
Yeah, we walk the beach there along Hulbert Avenue, sort of from the Brant Point all the way up to the other end. And what I was noticing after the storm on the southern part of that beach is a lot of shellfish, mussels, coha, clams up. But the thing that surprised me was I saw some of the biggest scallop shells I've seen mixed in with seed.
Oh, yeah.
So it was what struck me was it was two extremes. It was, 2.5 inch, just whole areas of 2.5 inch plus shells, and then all this little seed. And I presume it was just blown up because that part with a northeast wind or an east wind, that southern area probably collects a lot of that. So it just gets blown up there. But it just struck me that it was sort of like the two extremes. It wasn't just a bunch of medium-sized scallops. It was the big and the small.
Age classes, kind of how it, but definitely.
Just an observation.
I'm going to quickly share a discussion with board member Bill Blount today. He couldn't be here. As you all know, he's moved to New Bedford, but he would still like to try to attend meetings when he can. But he heard there were a lot of small nubs this year. He's always thought that allowing a 2 3/8 inch shell size nub versus the 2.5 would be better, because this has happened a lot in the old days. The wardens used to look the other way. Now they don't, and we have a problem. But last year, everyone had bay scallops. This year, no one has them. He stopped in at Westport and talked to some fishermen there, and the highliner there at opening day caught 12 scallops for the day. So just remember, one axiom is true of the bay scallop. Every year is different. They are fickle and erratic.
No, it's true. And I was just saying, I actually read an interesting paper today where they're showing that ocean acidification is having a really big impact on bay scallops as well.
So
So,
there's nothing on the guys this year.
no, I haven't talked to them about the harvest.
They just opened on Monday.
Yeah,
Got them picture.
no, I haven't talked to them yet either.
Can you repeat the little?
So I was saying is I'll see if I can send it around. I read a journal article today while I was waiting on hold on the conference call that was talking about the impacts of ocean acidification on bay scallops
Okay.
specifically, and they are showing that bay scallops seem to be somewhat more susceptible to the effects of acidification than a lot of other shellfish. So I'll bore you the technical details. That's kind of the real brief summary, but it's something that they would like to investigate more. So that's something that people are looking at bay scallops more and more. There wasn't a lot of tons and tons of research before, so it's coming up more and more often. So it'd be interesting to see if people start to find other things that, you know, we're looking for all of these, working on a lot of habitat issues, but sometimes there are other things that are a part of that conversation that are new. So see where that leads.
All right. Well, Joe.
I think in most marine fisheries, there's these cycles that occur. I mean, some years bluefish are up, some years stripers are up. But the acidification issue, I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up. My wife and I are not the most proficient shuckers on the face of the earth, but I must admit that I broke a lot more shells this year as I was coming over, you know, the first cut over the top.
Mm-hmm.
You would either get a piece of shell on top of the scallop, or you'd actually break through the shell. And I actually thought that they were much more fragile than I remember them being. You know, in the 20 years that I've been just, you know, recreational scalloping, and I thought it gotten worse each year. The other thing that was interesting was we had a couple of bad days at the very opening of the season in Nantucket, and then we went back over to Mr. Rogers' house, and we had one day that it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe how many scallops we picked up in a short period of time. We went back a week later, not. And I don't think it was that people just went over there. I think there's a lot of movement because of the wind, and in shallow areas.
They swim too, so they're extra tricky.
I mean, I guess my question was in terms of management. You're talking about management, long-term management, which I think is important. But do they fall into the channels? I mean, do they congregate in the channels in the wind, and then all of a sudden a certain wind comes up and pushes them out? I mean, I don't know, but it seems like there's significant variability in Nantucket Harbor of where they are week to week. You know, I mean, it's really, it's spooky, and that's just a
Maybe
personal
we
observation.
need to tag a few like they do
Well,
the sharks,
I
and
will
then
say,
follow them with a
I'm happy to have
GPS to find out where that scallop went.
That's a much longer conversation on how
Okay.
scallops move, and I won't save everyone, I'll
Okay.
spare everyone the boring here.
I'm just curious, but I really like your idea of a managed fishery where you make decisions on how much you think you can take rather than a set limit each year, depending on what's there, because it changes so much.
It's one of those, we have the ability to get that information now, and a lot of, you know, technology is available that can aid in eelgrass mapping, can do things quickly to know habitats are available, to do stock assessments of things much more readily than even 5 years ago and 10 years ago, that you can get the information and do it relatively simply. It just seems to make sense that you would want to arm yourself with the best information possible.
Well, if there's no more discussion on this, recapping items for next meeting. I think we've got a good amount going on for the next meeting. So,
I think I'm done with chapter 91 for the time being. Unless Sheila, yeah.
we're going to continue with it.
Yeah, okay.
Because I'd love to hear from Sheila
Yeah.
when she's present. So, and Jeff, if something happens, it seems to me that if closing the season or closing certain areas is going to be considered, closing certain areas is one thing. Closing the entire season, I would imagine, it's going to take some decision-making discernment,
Totally.
to
Well,
say the
it's
least.
one of
So,
those things, like, I'm making very clear that that's not what we're saying right now, but what we're saying is we have all of the symptoms of a problem, and the people that diagnose that problem are the people that are doing it right now. And it's
enough said there. The fishermen are. If you have some fishermen making that suggestion, then there's reason to look into it more.
yeah, and it's something we just want everyone to know that there's going to be discussions where those things may come up and be a part of that discussion. So when it comes up, don't get upset. Discuss it and let's figure out the best path to go.
Yeah.
You may
Trust-
need to talk to the Shellfish Association about flak jackets and bodyguards.
No, I mean, well, it's one of those things. Like I don't think we'll need it. I mean, I was in the garage at Two Fairgrounds when we talked about the nut rule, and got to hear someone say to the Division Marine Fisheries guy, hopefully no one finds out where you live because they're going to burn your house down. So I don't think this is that case. I mean, I think the goal here is to say, we're getting the reports. This is what we're thinking of doing. Speak now.
Yeah.
This is your chance. Like we're not saying that it's set in stone. Let's all get together. You're always going to have some dissenters to that, but I think it's something where if you're open and honest with people about it and say this is what we're doing, and you build kind of a consensus. Sure, there's going to be people that disagree, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to do what's best. So hopefully 3 years from now, we're all sitting here talking about we don't have sites to store all of the shells that we're collecting for bay scallops because the population is so huge. I would rather be talking about that, believe me. So, but I think that's, again, having an engaging, transparent process, I think is important for that. To get input from that SA and from other stakeholders to say, hey, this is what we think is best, and this is why we think it's best. I don't think anyone, I mean, there's going to be someone upset, but I don't think they're going to be looking for, their pitchfork and their torch. So let's hope not. If not, I'll send them all to Andy's house because he's a jerk. So.
I love your analogies, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff, for the amount of
Yes.
time you spent with us tonight.
Yes,
I really,
thank you.
It was very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Try to make it, but sometimes
Good meeting.
No. It was very good.
no capsize.
Doesn't have to be every meeting, but every now and then it's nice to have the luxury of listening to it.
I get chatty sometimes.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.